Throughout the years, there's been all those little gaming masterpieces that slid through the cracks, often because they were overshadowed by bigger and better games with larger marketing and advertising budgets. Cryostasis Sleeper Reason seems like one of those games. I mean, you see the box art and the screenshots, and it appears to be a very spooky and unique looking horror game that visually takes influences from films like John Carpenter's The Thing, featuring an Arctic setting seldom seen in video games. You'll soon come to realise it's not one of those games, and Cryostasis is an absolute disaster of a game for a few key fundamental reasons. It was developed by Action Forms and released exclusively for Microsoft Windows in 2009. The premise itself is definitely appealing at its most basic level. The setting is an abandoned nuclear icebreaker, and your character is a young Russian meteorologist named Alexander. The entire place is abandoned and derelict, and all of the crewmen are deformed and demonic, hunting down Alexander with murderous intent. You relive the memories of events that occurred on the ship through something referred to in-game as mental echoes. Throughout the campaign, you'll have the chance to rewrite history by hopping into the shoes of the various unfortunate perished souls and altering the past as you progress onward. You'll also see events that have transpired through flashbacks which occur at random during each level. These flashbacks and mental echoes serve as the only form of exposition in the game, as Alexander is mute the entire time, and the way the truth is slowly uncovered throughout the campaign is really the only reason worth playing. It's common to be killed during mental echoes, as they're often full of traps that aren't always obvious to avoid or happen so quickly you don't have time to react, which can be a bit annoying. During flashbacks though, you're required to do little more than just stand there and listen to what people have to say.
To the hallway then, along the walls, quickly!
These are quite frequent and at times annoying, but like I said, the story is pretty interesting, and at the very least it's mysterious enough that you'll want to know what has happened. But my issue with this game doesn't have that much to do with the storyline or the narrative. The first real problem I have with this game stems from the visuals. Now, it's true that they've done a great job of capturing the atmosphere through clever lighting and the use of ambient sound. There were moments when I literally just stood still for 10 or 15 seconds, admiring how gorgeous certain areas looked. Some of the monster designs are creative and unsettling and animated quite well. The majority of the areas on the ship have been subjected to the Arctic weather, and every surface is covered in a thin layer of frost. When you turn on the power supply in one of these areas, the frosted surfaces will literally melt right in front of your eyes, and it's impressive stuff. However, the game runs like total horse shit, even on a modern rig with lots of mouse jittering, chugging frame rates, and long load times. It just shouldn't perform this poorly considering how old the game is, and also considering that the character and weapon models look like something from the PlayStation 2. And to make matters worse, it crashes a lot, maybe 5 or 6 times per level. Thank God for quick saves. Certain areas feature lots of pulsing and strobe lighting, and I seriously had to stop playing every half hour because it felt like my head was about to split open due to the FOV and this unstable frame rate. I don't know if it's intentional or not either, but every area on the ship is also really small and confined, almost claustrophobic, which makes navigation extremely difficult. This might have been a conscious choice, but it sure does make the game world seem underwhelming at times. Now, I wish the problems with this game were limited only to the visuals, but they're not. I mean, even the basic controls are deeply flawed. Before playing this, the only game I can think of that has such a slow basic movement speed was the Penumbra, Amnesia, and Condemned games. Though all of these games featured a sprint mechanic, kind of cancelling this complaint out. Cryostasis does have sprinting, but it runs out so quickly it may as well not even be there in the first place. Instead of a health bar, you've got a heat bar, which you can refill at heat sources, and when this thing is near empty, the sprint mechanic may as well not even exist. The speed at which your character walks is what you might expect if you're crouching or even in the prone position in any other first-person game. I'm not exaggerating here, it's really that slow. While I mentioned Condemned, it might also be worth pointing out the game's combat system, which is really a watered-down, sloppier version of the system seen in those two games. Combat against enemies is broken down into 2 categories, either ranged or melee. Alexander is a meteorologist by trade, but that doesn't stop him from beating or shooting the shit out of everything that gets in his way. Using your fist, you can bust out different attacks by holding down the movement keys as you strike, and later on you can buff your fists with a padlock, valve handle, and also wield a fire axe, which for some reason you can't block with. The second half of the game throws lots of guns and ammunition at you, and as a result, you probably won't even bother with the melee combat at all. These guns include a few different rifle types, a flare gun, a water cannon, and a Soviet submachine gun, with the rifles and submachine gun being the most useful by far. And the flare gun doing bugger all and having very little available ammo. The water cannon is probably the most interesting. With this gun, it shoots out a jet of water, which I guess must be ice cold or something, as it renders enemies unable to fight back when they're hit by it. For ammunition, it uses icicles, which are scattered around the ship in total abundance. Now, the only downside is that you need to be right next to an enemy to use this thing, but it's still effective when the opportunity arises. What I don't like is that there's no numerical indicator for how much ammo you've got left, just a visual representation of the weapon's magazine in your heads-up display. Also, for some reason, there's no locational damage in the game either, and shooting someone in the head or the foot seems to do the same amount of damage. Let's ignore the fact that a game made in 2009 doesn't have locational-based damage, shall we? Now, whilst most of the issues might not sound that bad by themselves, they really do all add up, and it's impossible to ever get into an enjoyable rhythm with this game because you're constantly having to deal with all these minor annoyances. Then just when you get a bit of a groove on and start getting immersed and enjoying yourself is when the game usually crashes to the desktop. I think what hurts most about Cryostasis is that you can really see the potential the game had, but when you get right into it, it's just a muddled mess of a game with a lot of good ideas that weren't quite refined enough. It's like the lump of coal that got pulled out before it got turned into a diamond, or the caterpillar that emerged from its cocoon too early. Make sense? The controls are crappy, the game crashes a lot, and the mechanics just aren't all that polished. It's a battle of patience and attrition more than it is a cohesive, enjoyable gaming experience. Also, the whole concept of time traveling isn't really ever addressed as far as I could tell. I mean, why does Alexander even have this power in the first place? It's something I either missed or does never get revealed. If you're after a Russian-themed game that explores the concept of time travel, I'd suggest a game like Singularity, which does a far better job at delivering an engaging story and also has much more satisfying gameplay. If you want a creepy science fiction film in an Arctic setting, then go watch John Carpenter's The Thing. And even if you don't want a creepy science fiction film, watch it anyway, Sonny Jim, because it's awesome. Ultimately, as hard as it tried, Cryostasis Sleep of Reason just left me out in the cold. Thank you very much, I'll be here all night, be sure to tip your waitress.